Dr. Michael Patterson's hands froze mid-stitch, the surgical thread trembling as he stared at the monitor displaying the bear cub's brain scan. What he saw defied every law of veterinary medicine he'd practiced for 30 years. The tumor wasn't killing the animal, it was saving it. The operating room erupted as his assistant stumbled backward, knocking over the instrument tray with a metallic crash that echoed through the silence. Dr. Sarah Chen's face drained of color as she pointed at the screen with a shaking finger. Michael's mind raced back to his son Tommy's final hospital room, where another impossible scan had changed everything. The same neural patterns, the same miraculous anomaly that doctors had dismissed as equipment failure. "Get Blackwood on the phone," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible over the steady beep of monitors. "Tell him we need to talk." But as the sedated bear cub stirred on the table, opening eyes that seemed far too knowing for any wild animal, one question burned through Michael's skull. How could a dying bear possess the same brain activity as his deceased son? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Dr. Michael Patterson had been a different man, the kind who believed in second chances, who saw hope in hopeless cases, who could look at a dying animal and still fight for its life. That was before Tommy died, before Jennifer packed her bags and left him alone in their cabin outside Glacier National Park, Montana, with nothing but whiskey bottles and the echoing silence of what used to be a home. Now, at 52, Michael spent his days in isolation, feeding the local wildlife from his back porch and avoiding the veterinary clinic in town where his former colleagues still practiced. The mountains surrounding his cabin had become both sanctuary and prison, their towering peaks reflecting his own emotional walls. Every morning, he'd wake to the sound of birds chirping where Tommy's laughter used to fill the air. Every evening, he'd pour another glass of bourbon and stare at the framed photo of his 8-year-old son, the one taken just weeks before the brain tumor stole everything that mattered. Jennifer's voice still haunted him from their last fight. "You save everyone except the ones who matter, Michael. You spent more time with dying animals than with your dying son." The accusation had cut deeper than any scalpel because part of him knew it was true. He'd been at the clinic when Tommy had his first seizure. He'd been setting a broken wing on a hawk when his boy needed him most. The cabin reflected his state of mind, once immaculate, now cluttered with empty bottles and unopened mail. Dust covered the medical journals he used to read religiously. His veterinary bag sat untouched in the corner, a reminder of the healer he used to be before he couldn't heal what mattered most. 30 miles away, Dr. Richard Blackwood ran Montana Wildlife Services with military precision. At 48, he'd built his reputation on cold efficiency and practical decisions. "Resources are finite. Emotions are not solutions," he'd tell his staff daily. Behind his stern exterior lay his own devastating loss, his 6-year-old daughter, Sarah, taken by leukemia 5 years ago. But unlike Michael, Blackwood had channeled his grief into rigid control, believing that saving taxpayer money was more important than saving individual animals. His office walls displayed certificates and commendations, but no family photos. He'd removed them all after Sarah's funeral, when well-meaning colleagues kept offering their sympathies. The only personal item remaining was a small teddy bear hidden in his desk drawer, Sarah's favorite, which he couldn't bring himself to throw away but couldn't bear to see. October's golden aspens were beginning to shed their leaves around Michael's cabin, signaling the approach of another lonely winter. He'd grown accustomed to the routine, coffee at dawn, feeding the deer and raccoons that had learned to trust him. Then hours of silence broken only by the occasional phone call from Jennifer's lawyer about divorce papers he refused to sign. Neither man knew that their paths would soon collide over a dying bear cub, or that their shared grief would either destroy them both or teach them that healing sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Michael's morning routine shattered at 6:47 a.m. when he stepped onto his porch with his usual cup of black coffee and nearly dropped the mug. There, curled against his woodpile like a discarded stuffed animal, lay a black bear cub that couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds. But it wasn't the bear's size that made Michael's breath catch. It was the grotesque tumor covering nearly half its face, swollen and angry like a tennis ball, grafted onto the animal's left eye socket. The cub's breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Its remaining eye, cloudy with pain and exhaustion, tracked Michael's movement with an awareness that seemed almost human. Michael had seen thousands of injured animals during his 30-year career, but something about this one hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The way the cub held its head tilted to one side, favoring its good eye, reminded him of Tommy during those final weeks when the brain tumor had affected his vision. "Jesus Christ," Michael whispered, setting down his coffee with trembling hands. Every instinct screamed at him to call Montana Wildlife Services immediately. Protocol demanded it. Blackwood's department handled all wild animal emergencies, and harboring an injured bear without reporting it was a federal offense. But Michael couldn't make his feet move toward the phone. Instead, he found himself slowly approaching the cub, speaking in the same gentle tone he'd once used to comfort Tommy during sleepless nights in the hospital. "Hey there, little guy. What happened to you?" The bear didn't flee, which should have been his first warning that something wasn't right. Wild bears, even sick ones, didn't simply lie still when humans approached. As Michael knelt 3 feet away, the impossible happened. The cub lifted its head with tremendous effort and placed one small paw on Michael's outstretched hand. The touch was deliberate, almost human in its intention. Michael felt tears spring to his eyes as memories flooded back. Tommy's tiny hand in his during chemo treatments, the way his son would reach for him when the pain got too bad. "You're not supposed to trust me," Michael murmured, but he didn't pull his hand away. Wild animals don't do this. Yet here was this dying cub, looking at him with an expression that seemed to say, "I've been waiting for you." Michael's veterinary training kicked in despite his emotional turmoil. The tumor appeared to be an abscess rather than cancer, painful and potentially fatal if left untreated, but possibly curable with the right intervention. The cub was severely malnourished, probably hadn't eaten in days. Without immediate medical attention, it would be dead within 72 hours. The rational choice was clear. Call Blackwood, report the bear, let the system handle it. Blackwood would authorize euthanasia within hours, a quick, merciful end to the animal's suffering. It was the practical decision, the one that made financial sense for a department already stretched thin by budget cuts. But as Michael looked into the cub's remaining eye, he heard Tommy's voice from 3 years ago, weak but determined. "Dad, promise me you'll always help the ones who can't help themselves." It had been one of their last conversations before the final surgery that had taken his son away forever. Michael made a decision that would change everything. Instead of reaching for his phone to call authorities, he gently scooped the cub into his arms. The animal didn't struggle or cry out. It simply pressed its face against Michael's chest as if seeking comfort from an old friend. "I'm going to call you Baxter," Michael said, the name coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It had been his childhood teddy bear's name, the one he'd held during his own scary moments as a little boy. "And we're going to figure this out together." Carrying Baxter into his cabin, Michael's mind raced through his options. He couldn't treat the cub alone. The surgery required to drain and clean the abscess was beyond what he could manage in his makeshift home clinic. But he knew someone who might help, someone who operated outside the system's rigid protocols. Dr. Sarah Chen ran an unofficial after-hours veterinary clinic for people who couldn't afford traditional treatment for their pets. More importantly, she'd been Tommy's favorite nurse during his treatments. the one who'd stayed late to read him stories when Michael had to work. If anyone would understand why he couldn't let this bear die, it would be Sarah. As Michael reached for his phone to call her, Baxter did something that made his blood run cold. The cub, still weak and barely conscious, somehow managed to position himself between Michael and the door, as if protecting him from some unseen threat. It was the kind of behavior you'd expect from a trained dog, not a wild bear. "What the hell are you?" Michael whispered, but Baxter just closed his remaining eye and settled in for what might be his last sleep. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Montana mountains, and Michael realized he was about to cross a line that would put everything he had left at risk. Dr. Sarah Chen's underground clinic occupied the basement of an abandoned veterinary hospital on the outskirts of Kalispell, Montana. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Michael carried Baxter down the concrete steps, the bear cub's labored breathing echoing in the sterile hallway. Sarah had agreed to meet them after hours, no questions asked, but Michael could see the concern etched on her face as she examined the unconscious animal under the surgical lights. "Michael, this isn't just an abscess," Sarah said, her voice tight with professional worry as she studied the X-rays they'd just taken. "Look at these scans. The infection has spread deeper than I initially thought, and there's significant pressure on the optic nerve. We're talking about major surgery here, not a simple drainage procedure." Michael leaned over her shoulder, studying the ghostly images on the light board. The tumor's tendrils spread like twisted roots through Baxter's skull, but something else caught his attention. Unusual bone density patterns that reminded him of scans he'd seen before. "The neural pathways," he murmured, pointing to shadowy areas on the film. "They're not typical for a bear this age." "That's what worries me," Sarah replied, adjusting her glasses. "This cub shows signs of advanced cognitive development. The brain structure suggests intelligence levels we typically see in much older animals or in species with higher reasoning capabilities. It's like someone's been training him extensively." Before Michael could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Missing bear cub reported near Glacier Park. $5,000 reward for information leading to recovery. Contact Montana Wildlife Services immediately." His stomach dropped as he realized Blackwood's department was already mobilizing. "We need to operate tonight," Michael said, shoving his phone back into his pocket. "If Blackwood finds us, he'll put Baxter down before we can explain anything." Sarah nodded grimly, already laying out surgical instruments. "I'll need you to assist. This is going to take at least 3 hours, and I can't do it alone." She paused, looking directly at him. "Michael, you need to know, even if we're successful, there's a significant chance this cub won't survive the anesthesia. His body weight is critically low." As they prepared for surgery, Michael's phone rang. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen, and despite every instinct telling him to ignore it, he answered. Her voice came through strained and emotional. "Michael, I saw the news reports about a missing bear cub. Please tell me you're not doing something stupid." There was a long pause before she continued, her tone softer. "I'm pregnant, Michael. David proposed last week, and I said yes." The words hit him like a physical blow. David Morrison, Jennifer's new boyfriend, was everything Michael wasn't: stable, wealthy, emotionally available. "Congratulations," Michael managed, his voice hoarse. "I wanted you to hear it from me," Jennifer continued. "But Michael, I need you to know, if you're thinking about throwing your life away over some animal, don't. I can't watch you destroy yourself again. Tommy wouldn't want that." Michael ended the call without responding, his hands shaking as he scrubbed in for surgery. Sarah watched him with concerned eyes but said nothing. They both understood that this operation was about more than saving a bear cub. As Sarah administered the anesthesia, Baxter's remaining eye fixed on Michael with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. For a moment, the cub's paw moved toward Michael's hand in what looked like a deliberate gesture of trust. Then the animal went limp, and the only sounds in the room were the steady beep of monitors and the hum of surgical equipment. "Scalpel," Sarah said, beginning the first incision. What they found inside defied explanation. The abscess was massive, filled with infected tissue that should have killed the animal days ago. But surrounding the infection were signs of remarkable healing, new blood vessel growth and tissue regeneration that shouldn't have been possible in a malnourished cub. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah whispered, carefully removing infected material. "It's like his body is fighting the infection with super animal strength." 2 hours into the surgery, disaster struck. Baxter's heart rate dropped precipitously, then flatlined completely. The monitor's alarm screamed through the underground clinic as Sarah frantically administered cardiac medications. "No, no, no," Michael muttered, placing his hands on the small chest and beginning compressions. "Not again. I won't lose another one." His voice broke as he worked, sweat dripping onto the surgical field. For 87 seconds, Baxter was clinically dead. Then, impossibly, the heart monitor blipped back to life. Weak at first, then stronger, until Baxter's pulse stabilized at normal levels. Sarah stared at the monitors in disbelief. "That shouldn't be possible," she said. "The amount of anesthesia, the blood loss, the trauma. He should be dead." As they finished the surgery, removing the last of the infected tissue and cleaning the wound site, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had just happened. Baxter's recovery from cardiac arrest defied medical explanation, but more disturbing were the cub's behavioral patterns throughout the procedure. Even under deep anesthesia, the animal had seemed to respond to Michael's voice during the crisis, as if some part of him had been aware and fighting to come back. When they finally wheeled Baxter to the recovery area, Sarah pulled Michael aside. "There's something else," she said quietly. "When I was cleaning the wound, I found this." She held up a small, partially dissolved collar tag, barely legible but clearly man-made. Michael squinted at the faded engraving. "Property of—" The rest was illegible, but the implications were clear. Baxter wasn't a wild bear at all. He'd been someone's pet, possibly illegally obtained and abandoned when he became sick. "This changes everything," Michael said, pocketing the tag. "If someone owned him, trained him, then his unusual behavior makes sense. But who would abandon a sick animal like this?" Outside, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the Montana mountains, and Michael realized they'd crossed a point of no return. Baxter was no longer just a dying animal he'd tried to save. He was evidence of something larger, something that could destroy both their careers if discovered. As if sensing his thoughts, the unconscious cub stirred slightly, and Michael could have sworn he heard a sound that resembled a whispered, "Thank you." Recovery proved more challenging than the surgery itself. For the first 48 hours, Baxter refused to eat or drink anything when Michael wasn't in the room. Sarah documented this unusual behavior with growing concern, noting that the cub would only accept food directly from Michael's hand and seemed to enter a state of depression whenever left alone. The bandages covering half his face gave him an almost piratical appearance, but his remaining eye tracked Michael's every movement with an intelligence that made both veterinarians increasingly uncomfortable. "This isn't normal bonding behavior," Sarah observed on the third day, watching Baxter ignore a bowl of fish and honey until Michael arrived. "I've worked with dozens of rescued cubs, and they typically maintain their wild instincts even when habituated to humans. Baxter acts like he's been living with people his entire life." Michael knelt beside the recovery cage, offering small pieces of salmon by hand. The moment Baxter saw him, the cub perked up, eating eagerly and even making soft, huffing sounds that almost resembled purring. "Maybe whoever had him before really did train him extensively," Michael said, though something about that explanation felt incomplete. Their peaceful recovery period shattered on the fourth day when Michael's phone exploded with notifications. Someone had leaked security footage from Sarah's clinic showing the illegal surgery, and the video was spreading across social media like wildfire. The grainy black and white images showed Michael performing CPR on the small bear, his face clearly visible as he fought to save the animal's life. Within hours, #SaveBaxter was trending nationally. The video had been shared over 1 million times, with comments ranging from heartfelt support to angry criticism. "This is what real love looks like," wrote one user. "Taxpayer waste," countered another. "This man is a hero saving an innocent creature," versus breaking federal law to play God with wildlife. The media attention brought unwanted scrutiny from multiple directions. Animal rights groups hailed Michael as a champion of compassionate wildlife care, while fiscal conservatives branded him as another example of emotional decision-making trumping practical resource management. Most concerning was the attention from law enforcement. Montana Wildlife Services issued a public statement declaring the unauthorized treatment of the bear cub a violation of federal wildlife protection statutes. Dr. Richard Blackwood watched the viral video from his sterile office, his jaw clenched with familiar anger. The bear cub in the footage triggered memories he'd spent years suppressing. Sarah's favorite stuffed animal had been a black bear named Mr. Buttons, and she'd begged to visit the bears at the zoo even during her final rounds of chemotherapy. Seeing the injured cub on his computer screen felt like a personal attack on his carefully constructed emotional walls. "Get me everything on Dr. Michael Patterson," Blackwood ordered his assistant. "Veterinary license status, financial records, property ownership, divorce proceedings, everything. And I want a full investigation into this underground clinic operation." Within hours, Blackwood had assembled a damning portfolio. Michael's veterinary license had been suspended 6 months earlier following a malpractice lawsuit involving a botched surgery on a grizzly bear that resulted in the animal's death. The suspension was temporary, pending review, but it meant he had no legal authority to practice veterinary medicine. More damaging was evidence of Michael's alcohol problem and erratic behavior following his son's death. "Dr. Patterson is not the hero social media portrays," Blackwood announced at a press conference the next day. "He's a grieving father whose judgment has been compromised by personal tragedy. This bear cub needs professional medical care, not the attention of someone playing out his own psychological trauma." The press conference backfired spectacularly. Instead of turning public opinion against Michael, Blackwood's clinical dismissal of grief and his cold presentation style made him appear heartless. Social media exploded with criticism of his bureaucratic cruelty, and #FireBlackwood began trending alongside #SaveBaxter. Meanwhile, at the underground clinic, Michael watched his life implode in real time. The viral attention had brought offers of financial support. A GoFundMe campaign had raised over $200,000 for Baxter's care, but it had also attracted federal investigators. Sarah received a cease and desist order shutting down her clinic, and Michael faced potential charges for practicing veterinary medicine without a valid license. Jennifer's phone call came at the worst possible moment. "Michael, what the hell are you doing?" Her voice carried a mixture of exasperation and genuine concern. "The whole country is watching you break down in public. David's law firm has been fielding calls from reporters asking about our marriage, about Tommy, about whether you're mentally stable." "I'm saving a life," Michael replied, watching Baxter sleep peacefully in his recovery cage. "Something I should have done more of when it mattered." "You saved plenty of lives," Jennifer said, her tone softening. "Tommy's death wasn't your fault, Michael. The tumor was inoperable by the time they found it. Dr. Rodriguez told us from the beginning that surgery was a long shot." Michael felt tears burning his eyes. "I wasn't there when he needed me most. I was at the clinic setting a broken wing on some hawk while my son was having seizures. And if you'd been home, what would you have done differently? You're not a neurosurgeon, Michael. You couldn't have saved him any more than you could have prevented the tumor from growing. Jennifer paused, and he could hear her crying. This bear isn't Tommy. Saving him won't bring our son back. After ending the call, Michael sat alone with Baxter, who had somehow managed to position himself at the front of his cage with one paw extended toward Michael's chair. The gesture was unmistakably deliberate, offering comfort rather than seeking it. You understand, don't you? Michael whispered. You know what it's like to hurt. Sarah's arrival interrupted his brooding. We have a problem, she announced, holding up an official-looking document. Federal marshals served me with a warrant. They're seizing Baxter tomorrow morning for transfer to a licensed wildlife facility. Blackwood, Michael spat. He's using the legal system to force euthanasia. Once Baxter's in federal custody, they'll put him down within hours. There's more, Sarah continued grimly. I did some digging into that collar tag we found. The partial serial number traces back to a private exotic animal dealer in Colorado who went out of business 3 years ago under suspicious circumstances. The owner, Marcus Webb, was investigated for illegal wildlife trafficking, but never charged. Michael's blood ran cold. 3 years ago. That's when Tommy died, when I stopped paying attention to anything else. He stood up abruptly, pacing the small room. What if Baxter was part of some illegal operation? What if someone trained him specifically for what? Medical research? Entertainment? Or worse, Sarah said quietly. There have been cases of exotic animals being used in underground fighting operations or as illegal therapy animals for wealthy clients. The advanced training we observed, his unusual responses to human interaction, someone invested serious time and money in this bear. The implications were staggering. If Baxter had been illegally trafficked and abandoned when he became sick, then his rescue wasn't just a humanitarian act, it was evidence of a larger criminal operation. But it also meant that someone, somewhere, might be looking for their valuable property. As if sensing the tension in the room, Baxter began making soft, whimpering sounds, pressing himself against the cage bars nearest to Michael. The bandages covering his surgical site were clean and dry, showing excellent healing, but his behavior suggested emotional distress that went beyond physical recovery. He knows something's wrong, Michael observed. Look at him. He's scared. Sarah nodded, making notes in Baxter's medical chart. His vital signs are elevated, consistent with stress response. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there any possibility that you knew about this bear before you found him? Any connection to your son's treatment? Any overlap with people who might have had access to exotic animals? Michael started to shake his head, then stopped. A memory surfaced, vague and half-forgotten, of Tommy's final weeks at the children's hospital. There had been a therapy animal program, wasn't there? Specially trained animals that visited terminally ill children. He remembered Tommy talking excitedly about a special bear friend who was different from the others. Oh my God, Michael breathed. Tommy mentioned something about bears at the hospital. I thought he was talking about stuffed animals or maybe pictures in a book. But what if... He trailed off, the implications too vast to process. What if what? Sarah pressed. What if Baxter wasn't just any bear? What if he was specifically trained for medical therapy, and somehow Tommy met him during treatment? Michael's voice grew stronger as the pieces began falling into place. That would explain the advanced training, the unusual bonding behavior, even why he found his way to my cabin specifically. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through their conversation. Through the basement windows, they could see the distinctive markings of federal wildlife enforcement vehicles pulling into the parking lot above. They're early, Sarah said, quickly gathering Baxter's medical files. Michael, you need to decide right now. Do we surrender Baxter to the authorities or do we find another way? Michael looked at the bear cub, who was now standing at full height in his cage, alert and watching the ceiling as if he could sense the approaching danger. In that moment, Baxter's remaining eye met his, and Michael saw something that convinced him they were dealing with far more than a simple wildlife rescue. "We run," he said. The underground clinic erupted into chaos as federal agents pounded on the doors above. Michael hastily wrapped Baxter in a surgical blanket, while Sarah grabbed essential medical supplies, stuffing antibiotics and pain medication into a backpack. The bear cub, despite his recent surgery, seemed to understand the urgency. He pressed himself against Michael's chest and remained perfectly still as they navigated the clinic's emergency exit through a basement tunnel that connected to the neighboring building. "This leads to the old grain elevator," Sarah whispered, leading them through a narrow concrete passageway lit only by their phone flashlights. "My grandfather used it during Prohibition to move medical supplies." They emerged into the pre-dawn darkness behind an abandoned grain silo 3 blocks away, where Sarah's pickup truck waited. As Michael settled Baxter into the passenger seat, wrapping him in additional blankets, he could hear the distant sound of doors being forced open and agents shouting commands. The bear cub's breathing was slightly labored from the stress, but his remaining eye stayed focused on Michael with unwavering trust. "Where can we go?" Sarah asked, starting the engine and pulling onto a back road that led away from town. "Every veterinary clinic in the state will be watching for you now, and the moment you use a credit card or check into a motel, they'll track you down." Michael's mind raced through possibilities. His cabin was certainly being watched, and most of his professional contacts would be legally obligated to report his location. Then he remembered something Tommy had mentioned during his final hospital stay, a conversation about a place where broken things go to get better. "Head toward Whitefish," Michael said suddenly. "There's an old Methodist camp about 40 miles north of town. It's been abandoned for years, but the buildings might still be intact. Tommy and I used to drive past it on fishing trips." As they drove through the winding mountain roads, Michael's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. The story had exploded beyond social media into mainstream news coverage. CNN was running a segment titled "Bear Doctor on the Run," while Fox News countered with "Federal Fugitive Flees Wildlife Charges." The viral video of Baxter's surgery had been viewed over 50 million times, spawning countless memes, political commentary, and heated debates about animal rights versus law enforcement. More concerning were the direct messages flooding his social media accounts. Mixed among the supportive comments were threatening messages from people who viewed his actions as lawless vigilantism. "You're no hero," read one particularly vicious post. "You're a crazy old man who should be in prison." But others offered help. Farmers willing to hide him, veterinarians offering underground assistance, and ordinary citizens inspired by his dedication to saving a helpless creature. Dr. Richard Blackwood coordinated the manhunt from his sterile office, his anger building with each new piece of evidence that emerged about Michael's growing public support. The GoFundMe campaign had now raised over $2 million, with donations pouring in from around the world. Celebrities had begun posting #SaveBaxter messages, and several prominent animal rights organizations had issued statements supporting Michael's actions. "This has become a media circus," Blackwood told his assembled team of federal agents and local law enforcement. "Dr. Patterson is being portrayed as some kind of folk hero when he's actually a dangerous individual whose judgment has been compromised by personal tragedy. The bear needs proper medical care, not the attention of someone playing out his own psychological issues." Agent Rebecca Torres, the lead federal investigator, studied the case files with professional skepticism. "Sir, with respect, the medical records show that Dr. Patterson's surgery was successful. The bear's condition has improved dramatically and his recovery appears to be progressing normally. Are we certain that immediate capture is in the animal's best interest? Blackwood's face flushed with barely controlled rage. Agent Torres, Dr. Patterson is practicing veterinary medicine without a valid license, harboring protected wildlife without permits, and evading federal law enforcement. The bear's immediate medical condition is irrelevant to the multiple felonies being committed. What Blackwood didn't reveal was the personal vendetta driving his pursuit. The viral video of Michael desperately performing CPR on Baxter had triggered memories of his own daughter's final moments, how he'd stood helplessly while medical professionals fought to save Sarah's life. Seeing another father willing to break laws and risk everything for a dying creature felt like a personal rebuke of his own failure to save what mattered most. Meanwhile, Michael and Sarah reached the abandoned Methodist camp as the sun crested the mountain peaks. The cluster of wooden buildings sat in a pristine valley surrounded by towering pines and a small lake that reflected the morning sky like polished glass. Most of the structures were weathered but intact, including a main lodge with a stone fireplace and several smaller cabins that had once housed summer campers. "It's perfect," Sarah breathed, surveying the isolated location. No cell towers for miles, no main roads, and plenty of natural cover. "If we're careful, we could hide here for weeks." Michael carried Baxter into the main lodge, setting up a makeshift recovery area near the fireplace where he could monitor the cub's condition. Despite the stress of their escape, Baxter's surgical site looked good. No signs of infection, and his appetite had returned. More remarkably, his behavioral responses to Michael had become even more pronounced. The cub followed him everywhere possible, positioning himself between Michael and any perceived threats, and demonstrated an uncanny ability to sense Michael's emotional state. "Watch this," Michael said to Sarah, demonstrating something he'd discovered during their journey. When Michael appeared distressed or anxious, Baxter would approach and gently place his paw on Michael's hand or leg, a deliberate, comforting gesture that defied typical bear behavior. "He's not just bonded to me," Michael realized. "He's actively trying to take care of me." Sarah documented these interactions with growing amazement. "Michael, this level of emotional intelligence and therapeutic behavior isn't natural for bears, even trained ones. Someone invested enormous time and resources into developing these responses. We're talking about years of specialized conditioning." That evening, as they sat by the fireplace with Baxter sleeping peacefully beside them, Sarah's laptop picked up a weak internet signal from a distant cell tower. The news coverage had intensified throughout the day, with live television reports showing federal agents searching Michael's cabin and interviewing neighbors who described him as a broken man who loved animals more than people. More disturbing was an interview with Jennifer, who appeared uncomfortable but determined to set the record straight. "Michael isn't a criminal," she told the reporter firmly. "He's a grieving father who's channeled his pain into helping creatures that can't help themselves. The bear he's trying to save reminds him of our son, who died 3 years ago from a brain tumor." The interviewer pressed harder. "Mrs. Patterson, do you support your husband's decision to flee federal authorities?" Jennifer paused, her eyes filling with tears. "I support a man who's willing to risk everything to save a life. That's the Michael I fell in love with, and that's the father Tommy would be proud of." Michael felt his throat tighten as he watched his estranged wife defend him to the entire country. He'd assumed she viewed his actions as another example of his emotional instability, but her words suggested something deeper, perhaps an understanding that his fight to save Baxter was really a fight to reclaim the healer he used to be. The peaceful moment shattered when Sarah's laptop displayed an urgent news alert. "Breaking. Federal authorities believe fugitive veterinarian may be hiding in remote mountain locations. Residents advised to report any suspicious activity. Reward increased to $50,000. "They're closing in," Sarah said quietly. It's only a matter of time before someone spots your truck or reports unusual activity at this camp." Michael looked down at Baxter, who had awakened and was now gazing up at him with that peculiar intelligence that continued to unsettle both veterinarians. The cub's remaining eye seemed to hold depths of understanding that shouldn't exist in a wild animal, as if he comprehended not just the immediate danger, but the larger emotional stakes of their situation. "I won't let them put him down," Michael said with quiet determination. "Whatever happens to me, Baxter deserves a chance to live. Someone trained him to heal people, to offer comfort and hope. That's not something you destroy because it's inconvenient for bureaucrats." As if responding to his words, Baxter moved closer and rested his head against Michael's leg, a gesture of trust and affection that reminded both humans that some bonds transcend species, circumstances, and even the law. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountain peaks, and Michael realized they were about to face the greatest test of their unlikely partnership. The storm that had been threatening finally broke on their third night at the abandoned camp, unleashing torrential rain that turned the mountain roads into treacherous streams and knocked out what little cell phone coverage they'd been receiving. Michael should have felt safer with the weather providing natural cover, but Baxter's condition had taken an alarming turn during the afternoon. The bear cub, who had been recovering steadily since the surgery, suddenly became lethargic and disoriented. His surgical site showed no signs of infection, but his remaining eye appeared cloudy and he'd stopped eating entirely. Most concerning was his breathing, shallow and irregular, with long pauses that made Michael's chest tighten with familiar dread. "His neurological responses are deteriorating," Sarah observed, checking Baxter's pupils with a penlight. "This isn't related to the surgery site. Something else is happening, something systemic." Michael knelt beside the makeshift bed they'd created for Baxter near the fireplace, watching the small chest rise and fall with increasing effort. The sight triggered memories he'd fought to suppress. Tommy in his final days, when the brain tumor's pressure had caused similar respiratory distress. "It's the stress," Michael said, his voice hollow. "Being on the run, the constant fear, the change in environment, his body is shutting down." Outside, the storm intensified, and through the lodge's rain-streaked windows, Michael could see the faint glow of vehicle headlights winding up the mountain road toward their location. His heart sank as he counted at least 6 sets of lights. Federal agents, local police, and probably media vehicles following the convoy. "They found us," Sarah whispered, hastily gathering their few medical supplies. "Michael, we need to go. Now." But Michael couldn't move. Baxter's breathing had become so labored that each exhale might be his last, and moving him in this condition would almost certainly prove fatal. The bear cub's remaining eye fixed on Michael's face with an intensity that seemed to convey understanding. He knew he was dying, and he wanted to do it in the arms of the person who had fought to save him. "I can't," Michael said, tears streaming down his face. "I won't let him die alone and scared. Not again." Sarah's professional instincts warred with her personal loyalty. "Michael, if they find us here, they'll arrest you immediately. You'll face federal charges and Baxter will still die, just in government custody instead of peacefully." The headlights grew closer, and Michael could hear the rumble of engines over the storm's fury. He made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of running or hiding, he gathered Baxter in his arms and walked out onto the lodge's covered porch, where the approaching vehicles would see him clearly. "What are you doing?" Sarah called after him. "Something I should have done 3 years ago," Michael replied. "I'm not running anymore." Dr. Richard Blackwood emerged from the lead SUV, flanked by federal agents in tactical gear. His face was a mask of professional satisfaction. But something in his expression shifted when he saw Michael holding the dying bear cub in the storm's fury. The image was stark and powerful. a broken man cradling a small bandaged creature while rain lashed around them. "Dr. Patterson," Blackwood called over the storm, "you're under arrest for violations of federal wildlife protection statutes. Release the animal immediately and surrender yourself to federal custody." Michael didn't move. "He's dying, Blackwood. Look at him." "Does your bureaucratic protocol require that he die alone in a cage instead of with someone who cares about him?" Agent Torres stepped forward, her weapon holstered and her expression conflicted. The scene before her didn't match the dangerous fugitive narrative they'd been pursuing. Instead, she saw a grieving father holding a dying animal with the same tenderness she'd seen parents show their own children in hospital wards. "Sir," she addressed Blackwood quietly, "the animal appears to be in medical distress. Perhaps we should allow the veterinarian to provide medical assistance before proceeding with the arrest." Blackwood's face flushed with anger. "Agent Torres, you are not qualified to assess the medical needs of wildlife. Dr. Patterson has already demonstrated that his judgment is compromised by emotional attachment. The animal will receive proper care from licensed professionals." "What licensed professionals?" Michael shouted, his voice carrying over the storm. "You mean the ones who'll euthanize him within an hour to avoid the paperwork? This bear isn't just some random wild animal, Blackwood. He was trained to provide comfort to dying children. He spent his life healing others, and now he's dying because people like you see dollar signs instead of souls." The accusation struck closer to home than Michael realized. Blackwood's own daughter had spent her final months in a children's hospital, surrounded by therapy animals that had provided more comfort than any medical intervention. The memory of Sarah laughing while a golden retriever licked her bald head during chemotherapy was one of the few bright spots in his darkest period. "You don't know anything about loss," Blackwood replied, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I know everything about loss," Michael countered. "I know what it's like to watch your child die while you stand helpless. I know what it's like to spend every day afterward wondering if you could have saved them. And I know what it's like to find something worth saving and fight for it, even when the whole world tells you it's hopeless." Sarah emerged from the lodge carrying Baxter's medical files, her face streaming with rain and tears. "If you're going to arrest him, at least let me show you what we've discovered," she called to the agents. "This bear isn't what you think he is." Agent Torres approached cautiously, accepting the waterproof folder Sarah offered. Even in the storm's chaos, she could make out medical records, photographs, and documentation that painted a far more complex picture than the simple wildlife violation they'd been investigating. "These records show extensive behavioral modification training," Torres read aloud, squinting at the documents. "Therapeutic response protocols, medical desensitization, advanced cognitive conditioning. This animal was specifically trained to work with terminally ill patients." Blackwood snatched the files from Torres, scanning the pages with growing disbelief. The evidence was overwhelming. Baxter had been part of an experimental therapy program that worked with children's hospitals across the region. More damning was a photograph showing a young boy in a hospital bed, smiling while a small black bear cub sat beside him. "That's Tommy," Michael said quietly, recognizing his son's face in the photograph. 3 years ago, during his final treatment, I thought it was just a stuffed animal when he talked about his bear friend. I was so focused on medical procedures and treatment options that I never paid attention to what actually made him happy." The revelation hung in the storm-charged air like a physical presence. Blackwood stared at the photograph, seeing in Tommy's joyful expression the same light that had once filled his own daughter's eyes during her brief moments of happiness in the hospital. In Michael's arms, Baxter stirred weakly, lifting his head just enough to focus his remaining eye on Blackwood. The bear cub made a soft huffing sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whimper, that somehow conveyed recognition and an odd sort of greeting. "He knows you," Michael said with sudden understanding. "Blackwood, was your daughter treated at Children's Hospital in Denver? Did she ever participate in experimental therapy programs?" Blackwood's professional mask finally cracked completely. "Sarah loved the therapy animals," he whispered, rain mixing with tears on his face. "She said they understood her pain better than the doctors did. There was one bear cub she talked about constantly, said he was magic because he could tell when she was scared." The truth settled over the assembled group like the storm itself, inevitable and transformative. Baxter hadn't just provided comfort to Tommy during his final days. He'd touched multiple children's lives, including the daughter of the man now determined to destroy him. As if sensing the emotional shift around him, Baxter gathered his remaining strength and did something that defied explanation. The dying cub lifted his paw toward Blackwood in the same comforting gesture he'd shown Michael countless times, an offer of peace and understanding between former adversaries united by loss. For a moment, the storm seemed to pause, and in that silence, Michael realized that everything was about to change. Dr. Richard Blackwood stood frozen in the pouring rain, staring at the small paw extended toward him in a gesture of comfort that he'd witnessed his daughter Sarah receive countless times during her final months. The memory hit him with devastating clarity. 5-year-old Sarah, in her hospital bed, giggling as a bear cub named Button would gently pat her arm whenever she cried during treatments. The same deliberate therapeutic touch that Baxter was now offering him. "It's him," Blackwood whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Your Button. Sarah's Button." His hands trembled as he reached toward the dying cub, decades of professional composure crumbling in an instant. "She talked about you every day. Said you were the only one who understood how scared she was." Agent Torres watched in stunned silence as her commanding officer, the man known throughout federal wildlife services for his rigid enforcement of regulations, knelt in the mud beside Michael, tears streaming down his face as he gently touched the bear cub's extended paw. "Sir," Torres began hesitantly, "what are your orders regarding the arrest?" Blackwood didn't respond immediately. His mind was reeling through a cascade of buried memories and suppressed emotions. Sarah's final words had been about Button, how she hoped the special bear would help other kids who were scared and sick. She'd made him promise to take care of the animals that take care of people. Instead, he'd spent 5 years systematically destroying everything she'd loved as a way of punishing a world that had taken her away. In Michael's arms, Baxter's breathing became increasingly labored. The stress of the confrontation and the cold mountain storm were taking their toll on his already weakened system. His remaining eye began to close, and the small paw that had reached toward Blackwood slowly dropped back to his side. "He's going into cardiac distress," Sarah observed, checking Baxter's pulse with professional urgency. "His heart rate is dropping rapidly. We need to get him somewhere warm and dry immediately, or we're going to lose him." Michael felt the familiar panic rising in his chest, the same helpless terror he'd experienced watching Tommy slip away despite every medical intervention available. "Not again," he muttered, clutching Baxter closer. "I won't watch another one die because of bureaucratic bullshit." "The lodge," Blackwood said suddenly, his voice stronger now. "Move him back inside immediately. Agent Torres, get the medical kit from our vehicle and establish a warming station by the fireplace." He turned to the other federal agents, his authority reasserting itself with new purpose. "Stand down. This is now a medical emergency, not an arrest situation." "Sir," one of the agents protested, "our orders were clear. Dr. Patterson is a federal fugitive and the bear is evidence in an ongoing investigation." Blackwood's eyes flashed with something that made the agent step back involuntarily. "My daughter died," because people were more concerned with following procedures than saving lives. That ends now. Anyone who has a problem with my orders can explain themselves to the review board tomorrow." They carried Baxter back into the lodge, where Sarah quickly established a triage area near the blazing fireplace. The bear cub's condition had deteriorated rapidly. His breathing was shallow and irregular, his body temperature dropping, and his neurological responses were minimal. Most concerning was his heart rate, which had become erratic and weak. "It's not just the stress," Sarah announced after a thorough examination. "I'm seeing signs of delayed complications from the original surgery. There may be residual swelling affecting his brainstem, causing respiratory depression." Michael knelt beside Baxter, holding the small paw that had once comforted his dying son. "Is there anything we can do? Any treatment that might help?" Sarah's expression was grim as she consulted her medical references. "We'd need specialized equipment to reduce brain swelling, steroids, oxygen therapy, possibly even surgical intervention to relieve pressure, none of which we have access to in this abandoned camp." Agent Torres approached with unexpected news. "Dr. Blackwood, I've been monitoring communications and there's been a significant development. The viral video of Dr. Patterson's surgery has caught the attention of the National Children's Hospital Network. They're claiming that this bear was part of an authorized experimental therapy program that was shut down due to legal complications 3 years ago." Blackwood looked up sharply. "What kind of legal complications?" "Insurance liability issues," Torres continued, reading from her tablet. "Several families sued when therapy animals were removed from the program, claiming it violated their children's rights to alternative medical treatments. The program was discontinued, and the animals were supposed to be relocated to licensed wildlife facilities. But Baxter was never transferred," Michael realized with growing anger. "Someone kept him illegally, probably planning to sell him to private collectors or underground animal dealers. When he got sick, they just abandoned him in the wilderness to die." Sarah added another piece to the puzzle. "The advanced behavioral conditioning we observed makes sense now. These therapy animals underwent years of specialized training to recognize and respond to human emotional distress." Baxter's reactions to Michael weren't random bonding. They were programmed therapeutic responses. As if responding to the mention of his name, Baxter stirred weakly and opened his remaining eye. Despite his critical condition, he seemed to focus on Michael's face with remarkable clarity. Then, in a moment that would be seared into everyone's memory, the dying cub made a soft sound that was unmistakably an attempt at vocalization, not a typical bear grunt or whimper, but something that sounded almost like words. "Did he just try to talk?" Agent Torres asked in disbelief. Michael leaned closer, and Baxter made the sound again, a deliberate shaped vocalization that bore an eerie resemblance to da-da, the same sound Tommy used to make during his final weeks when the brain tumor had affected his speech. "Jesus Christ," Blackwood breathed. "The neural pathway conditioning. They didn't just train him to recognize emotions, they trained him to mimic human speech patterns as a comfort mechanism." The revelation was staggering. Baxter hadn't just been a therapy animal, he'd been part of an experimental program that pushed the boundaries of animal-human communication. No wonder his intelligence seemed so remarkable. He'd been specifically conditioned to interact with humans at a level that approached genuine conversation. Michael felt tears streaming down his face as he understood the full scope of what they were witnessing. "You came to find me, didn't you?" he whispered to Baxter. "Tommy told you to take care of his dad, and you've been trying to do that ever since." Sarah's medical monitoring showed Baxter's vital signs continuing to decline despite their efforts to stabilize him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Without access to a fully equipped veterinary ICU, there's nothing more we can do medically. We're just keeping him comfortable at this point." Blackwood stood abruptly, pulling out his satellite phone with sudden determination. "Agent Torres, what's the flight time from Denver Children's Hospital to the nearest helicopter landing zone?" "Sir, what are you thinking?" Torres asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "I'm thinking that my daughter made me promise to take care of the animals that take care of people," Blackwood replied, dialing a number he'd memorized years ago but never had the courage to call. "And I'm thinking that some promises are more important than regulations." The call connected, and Blackwood's voice took on an urgent authority. "This is Dr. Richard Blackwood, Montana Wildlife Services. I need to speak with Dr. Elizabeth Chen in pediatric neurology immediately. Yes, I know it's after midnight." "Tell her it's about the experimental therapy animal program that was discontinued in 2021. As Blackwood negotiated for emergency medical intervention, Michael held Baxter close, feeling the small heart beating irregularly against his chest. The bear cub's breathing was becoming increasingly shallow, but his remaining eye stayed fixed on Michael's face with unwavering trust. "Hold on, Button," Michael whispered, using Sarah's pet name for the first time. "Help is coming. Just hold on a little longer." Outside, the storm began to show signs of breaking, and in the distance, the rhythmic sound of helicopter rotors could be heard approaching through the mountain passes. Whether they were arriving in time to save Baxter's life remained to be seen, but for the first time in 3 years, Michael felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Hope that this time, love might be enough to triumph over loss. The helicopter's rotors beat against the storm-dark sky as it descended into the clearing beside the abandoned Methodist camp, its searchlights cutting through the rain like silver blades. Dr. Elizabeth Chen emerged from the aircraft with a team of pediatric specialists and portable medical equipment that transformed the rustic lodge into a makeshift intensive care unit within minutes. "Where's my patient?" Dr. Chen called over the rotor wash, her voice carrying the same authority Michael remembered from Tommy's final days at Denver Children's Hospital. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes held the same fierce determination that had made her legendary among families facing impossible medical situations. Michael carried Baxter toward the helicopter team, the bear cub's breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. "He's been declining rapidly over the past few hours," he reported with professional precision despite his emotional turmoil. "Respiratory depression, cardiac irregularities, and possible neurological complications from brain swelling." Dr. Chen took one look at Baxter and immediately began directing her team. "Get me oxygen saturation levels, establish IV access, and prepare the portable ventilator. This is neurological crisis secondary to intracranial pressure." She worked with practiced efficiency while addressing Michael directly. "Dr. Patterson, I need you to know, this bear saved more children than we ever documented officially. When the lawyers shut down our program, we lost track of outcomes, but the families never forgot." As the medical team worked to stabilize Baxter, Dr. Chen revealed information that stunned everyone present. "After the program ended, we received hundreds of letters from families describing miraculous improvements in their children's emotional recovery. Kids who had been withdrawn and terrified became engaged and hopeful after working with therapy bears like Button here. The insurance companies killed the program because they couldn't quantify the results, but the healing was real." Agent Torres documented everything with growing amazement. The federal investigation had uncovered not just a wildlife violation, but evidence of a covered-up medical breakthrough that had been sacrificed to corporate liability concerns. "Dr. Chen, are you saying that this bear and others like him were producing measurable therapeutic benefits?" "Measurable and repeatable," Dr. Chen confirmed while monitoring Baxter's vital signs. The bears were trained to recognize specific stress hormones in human breath and respond with targeted comfort behaviors. They could detect anxiety attacks before they peaked and intervene with calming techniques that worked better than pharmaceutical interventions for many children. Michael felt his worldview shifting as the implications became clear. Tommy's improvement during his final weeks, that wasn't just coincidence. Button was actually treating his emotional trauma while the medical team focused on the physical symptoms. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "Your son was one of our success stories, Dr. Patterson. His anxiety levels dropped 60% during the weeks he worked with Button." The bear seemed to understand that Tommy was afraid of being alone, so he developed a specific behavior pattern of staying close and providing constant physical contact. Blackwood, who had been quietly observing the medical intervention, stepped forward with visible emotion. "Sarah told me Button could tell when she was scared before she even knew it herself. She said he was like having a guardian angel who never left her side." The portable equipment showed Baxter's condition stabilizing under Dr. Chen's expert care. His breathing became more regular, his heart rate steadied, and most remarkably, his neurological responses began showing signs of improvement. The specialized steroids and oxygen therapy were reducing the brain swelling that had threatened his life. "He's responding," Dr. Chen announced with cautious optimism. "The intracranial pressure is decreasing, and his vital signs are improving. But he's not out of danger yet. We need to get him to a full medical facility for continued care." As if responding to the good news, Baxter opened his remaining eye and immediately sought out Michael's face. The bear cub made that soft vocalization again, the sound that resembled "dada," and reached his paw toward Michael with deliberate intention. The speech mimicry was the most remarkable aspect of the program, Dr. Chen explained, witnessing the interaction. The bears learned to produce sounds that comforted specific children. Button developed that particular vocalization for your son, Dr. Patterson. Tommy taught him to say "Daddy" during their sessions together. Michael felt tears streaming down his face as he understood the full scope of what had been lost when the program ended. These weren't just therapy animals. They were specially trained companions who formed deep, meaningful relationships with dying children, providing comfort that no human caregiver could match. Jennifer's voice cut through the medical activity as she emerged from a second helicopter that had landed nearby. "Michael!" She ran toward him through the rain, her face a mixture of relief, fear, and something that looked like pride. "I saw the news coverage. I couldn't stay away." Michael looked up in shock as his estranged wife approached. Her clothes soaked from the storm, but her expression determined. "Jennifer, what are you doing here? How did you—" "Dr. Chen called me," Jennifer interrupted, kneeling beside him as he held Baxter. "She told me about Tommy's connection to this bear, about the therapy program, about everything we never knew was happening during his final weeks." She reached out tentatively to touch Baxter's paw. "Tommy talked about Button constantly. I thought he was just imagining a friend because he was so sick and scared." Dr. Chen continued working while the family reunited around Baxter's makeshift bed. "The children in our program often formed attachment bonds with their therapy bears that lasted beyond their treatment. We documented cases where kids who recovered continued to dream about their bear companions years later." Blackwood approached with Agent Torres, his official demeanor replaced by something more human. "Dr. Patterson, I owe you an apology. I've spent 5 years punishing the world for taking my daughter, and I nearly destroyed something she died trying to protect." He paused, looking down at Baxter. "I'm formally recommending that all federal charges be dropped and that this bear be granted protected status as a medical therapy animal." Agent Torres nodded in agreement. The evidence clearly shows that Dr. Patterson was protecting a valuable therapeutic resource, not violating wildlife protection laws. This situation requires medical classification, not criminal prosecution. As the medical team prepared to transport Baxter to Denver Children's Hospital for continued care, the bear cub struggled to lift his head one more time. His remaining eye focused on each person who had fought to save him, Michael, Sarah, Blackwood, Jennifer, as if memorizing their faces or offering gratitude. "He knows," Jennifer whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "He understands that he's safe now, that people are going to take care of him." Dr. Chen smiled as she secured Baxter for transport. "He's been taking care of people his entire life." It's time someone returned the favor. As the helicopters lifted off into the clearing storm, Michael held Jennifer's hand and watched Baxter disappear into the night sky, finally understanding that some endings are actually new beginnings, and that love, whether between humans or across species, never truly dies. 6 months later, Michael Patterson stood in the sunlit lobby of Tommy's Haven, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as children laughed and played in the therapy garden outside. The converted ranch facility, nestled in the foothills of Glacier National Park, had become something neither he nor anyone else could have imagined. A revolutionary center where specially trained animals provided comfort and healing to families facing their darkest moments. Baxter, now fully recovered and wearing a specially designed eye patch that had become his trademark, sat calmly beside 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez as she read him a story about brave bears. The little girl was halfway through her leukemia treatment, and her parents had driven 12 hours from Phoenix after hearing about the miracle bear who helped children find courage during chemotherapy. Emma's bald head gleamed in the afternoon light as she giggled at Baxter's gentle responses to her reading. His soft huffs and careful paw movements timed perfectly to her emotional needs. "Look at them," Jennifer said, joining Michael at the window while balancing their 3-month-old daughter, Sarah Baxter Patterson, against her shoulder. "He knows exactly when she needs comfort and when she needs to feel strong." Michael wrapped his arm around his wife, marveling at how their family had been rebuilt from the ashes of grief and separation. Jennifer's decision to leave David and remarry Michael had surprised everyone, including herself, but watching him fight for Baxter had reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with. Someone who believed healing was always possible, even when hope seemed lost. Dr. Richard Blackwood emerged from the administrative wing, carrying a stack of federal approval documents that would secure the facility's funding for the next 5 years. His transformation from rigid bureaucrat to passionate advocate had been the most unexpected outcome of their mountain confrontation. "The Department of Health and Human Services just approved our expansion proposal," he announced with barely contained excitement. "We can add 3 more therapy bears and establish satellite programs in 6 children's hospitals across the region." Sarah Chen, now serving as the facility's head veterinarian, looked up from her charts with professional satisfaction. "Baxter's medical records are going to revolutionize how we understand animal-assisted therapy. His neurological responses show adaptation patterns that suggest genuine emotional intelligence, not just trained behaviors." The success of Tommy's Haven had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Within months of opening, they documented remarkable improvements in pediatric patients' anxiety levels, treatment compliance, and overall emotional well-being. Children who had been withdrawn and terrified found courage through their relationships with therapy bears who seemed to understand their fears better than any human caregiver. More importantly, the families found healing too. Parents who had felt helpless watching their children suffer discovered that the bears provided comfort, not just to patients but to everyone touched by serious illness. Siblings felt less forgotten, grandparents found ways to connect across generational gaps, and marriages strained by medical crises began to strengthen. Emma's mother, Maria Rodriguez, approached Michael with tears in her eyes. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "Emma hasn't smiled in 3 months, not since we started chemo, but today with Baxter, she's been laughing and playing like a normal little girl." Michael felt the familiar tightening in his throat that came whenever he witnessed the healing process he'd once thought impossible. "Baxter's the one doing the real work," he replied. "I'm just lucky he chose to trust me." The afternoon's programming included a visit from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who had become a regular consultant as they refined their therapeutic protocols. She arrived with a film crew from the National Geographic Channel documenting the groundbreaking work being done at the facility for a documentary titled The Healing Bears. "Dr. Patterson," the lead cameraman called, "we'd like to film you and Baxter working with one of the families, if that's possible." Michael looked toward Emma and her parents, who nodded enthusiastically. The little girl had specifically requested that her session be filmed so other children could learn about the magic bear who helped kids be brave during scary treatments. As the cameras rolled, Baxter demonstrated the remarkable behaviors that had made him famous, recognizing when Emma felt nauseated from chemotherapy and providing gentle pressure therapy, sensing her anxiety about upcoming procedures and offering calming contact, even seeming to understand when she needed space versus when she needed closeness. The most remarkable aspect of these interactions, Dr. Elizabeth Chen explained to the camera, is that the bears respond to physiological changes in stress hormones that humans can't detect. They're providing medical intervention at a cellular level while simultaneously offering emotional support. Agent Rebecca Torres, who had become a regular visitor and unofficial advocate for the program, watched the filming with professional interest. Her federal investigation had evolved into a comprehensive study of animal-assisted therapy programs, leading to new legislation protecting therapeutic animals from bureaucratic interference. 6 months ago, I was preparing to arrest Dr. Patterson for wildlife violations, Torres told the documentary crew. Today, I'm recommending his program as a model for federal healthcare policy. Sometimes justice means recognizing when the law is wrong. As the afternoon wore on, more families arrived for their scheduled sessions. The Wilson family from Denver brought their teenage son, Jake, who had been struggling with severe depression following a traumatic brain injury. The elderly couple from Billings, Harold and Ruth Thompson, came with their granddaughter Lily, who had been selectively mute since witnessing her parents' car accident. Each family brought their own story of loss, fear, and desperate hope. And each found something at Tommy's Haven that traditional medicine couldn't provide, a connection that transcended species and circumstance, offering comfort that felt almost spiritual in its power. Blackwood pulled Michael aside as the day's sessions concluded. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice carrying unusual emotion. "The Make-A-Wish Foundation has reached out. They want to fund a permanent memorial to Tommy and Sarah, a children's garden where kids can remember friends they've lost while playing with the therapy bears." Michael felt his eyes fill with tears. The idea that Tommy's memory would live on through a place where other children found comfort seemed like perfect closure for their journey. "He would have loved that," Michael said. "He always said the bears were magic because they helped kids stop being scared." Jennifer joined them, baby Sarah gurgling contentedly in her arms. "Have you decided what you want to call the memorial garden?" she asked. Michael looked out at the therapy area where Baxter was now surrounded by children, their laughter carrying across the grounds like music. "Tommy's promise," he said without hesitation, "because he made me promise to always help the ones who can't help themselves, and Baxter taught me that promise includes taking care of each other." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, casting golden light across the facility grounds, the families gathered for their daily closing circle. Children sat with their therapy bears while parents and grandparents formed a larger circle around them. It had become a tradition to share one thing they were grateful for and one hope for tomorrow. When it came to Michael's turn, he looked around the circle at the faces illuminated by the setting sun, families who had found healing, colleagues who had become friends, and his own rebuilt family that had emerged from grief stronger than before. "I'm grateful," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet gathering, "for a bear who taught me that love doesn't end with death. It just finds new ways to heal the world. And I hope that tomorrow, somewhere, another child who's scared and alone will find comfort in a furry friend who understands exactly how they feel." Baxter, as if understanding the significance of the moment, stood on his hind legs and wrapped his arms around Michael in what could only be described as a hug. The gesture brought tears to every adult eye and delighted squeals from the children, who immediately demanded their own bear hugs. As families began departing for the evening, promising to return tomorrow for continued sessions, Michael realized that they had created something unprecedented, a place where grief transformed into healing, where lost hope found new life, and where the impossible became routine. The facility's success had attracted national attention, with similar programs being established across the country. Medical schools were developing curricula around animal-assisted therapy, insurance companies were beginning to cover treatments, and families were finding new pathways to healing that traditional medicine had never offered. Most importantly, children like Emma Rodriguez were learning that even in their darkest moments, they weren't alone. They had furry guardians who understood their fear, shared their courage, and reminded them daily that love, whether human or animal, never gives up. As Michael carried his sleeping daughter toward their on-site residence with Jennifer's hand warm in his and Baxter padding contentedly beside them, he understood that some stories don't end, they just become the beginning of something even more beautiful. Dear friends, watching Michael's journey from heartbreak to healing reminds us that our deepest losses can become our greatest purposes. Like Michael, many of us have faced moments when we felt broken beyond repair, when love seemed insufficient against life's cruelest blows. Yet his story with Baxter proves that healing often comes through serving others, that our wounded hearts can become sources of strength for those still struggling. Whether you're a grandparent worried about a grandchild's struggles, a parent who's lost someone precious, or simply someone who believes in second chances, this story speaks to the truth that love transcends loss, and that sometimes our greatest pain becomes our most powerful gift to the world. Have you ever found healing through helping others during your own darkest moments? What Baxter in your life has reminded you that hope can emerge from heartbreak? Please share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.